Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We got the diner ambiance going on in the background already. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. That's the day, well, Monday and Fridays are the days we host a diner here. We are like an Airbnb kitchen, pop-up diner. And that would be an interesting way of... Here's our new fundraiser. You can come and eat in our pop-up diner on Mondays and Fridays for the low, low price of... Give me something outrageous that we could do and maybe get 2 people in the world who could afford such a thing. But it's like an NFT, which are apparently now worthless. I've been seeing all the chatter about that I ever see, really. Like 2 people that I know that talk about NFTs say somehow something, I don't know what happened. What was the triggering event? All the NFTs are worthless. But all the NFTs were worthless before. And so now there are people who have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on digital pictures of weird-looking apes. And they all, I guess, stare at each other and commiserate, I guess. Maybe that's where the value still lies. Okay. All levels 5 by 5. Welcome to Friday, September 22nd, 2023. We'll be off the air for 9/23/23. Wink, wink. But if there's lottery out there for you, or you, I guess all you have is 23. So... roulette, maybe? Is that what you can do with that? I don't even know. Is there a 23 in a roulette wheel? I'm a huge gambler, obviously, as you can tell. And I do this all the time. How are you? It is the 22nd day of September. How was the 21st night of September? Does everyone remember? I'm just asking. And if you don't know, well... you couldn't be blamed. I mean, Earth, Wind, and Fire, they were only asking that question, whether you remembered the 21st night of September, and I guess not everybody does. It's an open question until they put it to you. But I did warn you yesterday that you should be on the lookout for something unusual or worthy of note from last night. Anything happen? I've got this. As I was preparing to bring you a show and thinking over the fact that I had used my very Friday story that Rosalind McGregor had sent our way about the weird intrigues in the, they said monastery, but I suppose, I mean, is that the word that you use when you're talking about the cloistered home of nuns? I thought that was for... monks was a monastery, and I don't know. All I have is the weird Anglo word of nunnery, which doesn't sound like a real word, but makes it sound like a factory where they turn out nuns. What are they? An abbey, perhaps? Although that too, I don't know. Often run by monks. It does. I don't know. But at any rate, that was a very interesting story, but a very Friday story. And I thought, what will I do with my Friday? And several answers present themselves. First of all, Rosalind did not leave us high and dry in any way. She's already had in the bank here a contributed recorded segment, a report from her beloved Michigan, keeping us up to date on what's going on in crazy Ottawa County, the ongoing saga. This should be a Netflix miniseries at this point, I think. If we had... millions of dollars at our disposal and a crew of dedicated employees, staff, production assistants, etc. We have a few around here who can't seem to escape. But if we had enough to remunerate them properly, we could produce a Netflix series. I do often wonder what life it must be like for the types of people who can wake up in the morning and say, I actually have a pretty good idea. I'm going to make some calls and we might have a good shot at producing a Netflix series. We just have to sit there and dream. Like Matt Gaetz might perhaps be dreaming of becoming Speaker of the House, or Kevin McCarthy might be dreaming of becoming Speaker of the House one day and actually wielding that power. That story in the news. We are, of course, derailed instantly and in the most pleasant way by the interjections from Justice Putnam, giving us the thumbs up, telling us the signals are working today, and hinting at the weird stories that have captured his attention. This one's weird, and it captures my attention too. Here's a good one. Whose report is this? Raw story. Okay, so one, we'll click on through, and two, prepare for pop-ups that will get in the way of everything else for the rest of the day until we close that window. Raw story, most notorious for pop-ups in my view, but also some good reporting and certainly some good people putting it all together. In this case, David Badash, who writes, ready for this one? It starts out, sexy. It's a quote from somebody. I don't know who. And then a colon, so that we understand that what comes next is supposed to explain this weird interjection of sexy. Comer, not the sexy guy, James Comer of the Oversight Committee obtains unredacted emails. First of all, that by itself calls for dramatic music. Unredacted emails are always intriguing. In this case, unredacted emails to Vice President Biden revealing women, quote, privately mused, unquote, they found him attractive. I'm not really sure of the governmental import of this, and whether this is meant to suggest that they somehow decided to cheat in the election in his favor because of how very, very sexy he is. That's the vocal fry coming in when we contemplate Joe Biden's sexy countenance. All right. Well, it's a story. It's been printed. It's my responsibility to read it to you now. Amid the chaos of what top Democrats are calling the GOP House's civil war, infighting that threatens to shut down the federal government in 9 days, just in case you were keeping track and didn't listen to Joan when she gave you the number, Oversight Committee Chairman Jim Comer has been obtaining some of then Vice President Joe Biden's emails from the National Archive, which, of course, is possible because Joe Biden turned over his paperwork to the National Archives. Not so with a certain recent ex-president, let's say. So what's happening here? What's my Politico reveals Chairman Comer, I could be reading it from Politico, but I'm enjoying the pop-ups, so and David's work here. Politico reveals Chairman Comer has been able to obtain several unredacted emails, including one which relayed a tidbit of hearsay, or, quote, private musings, from 2009, that most relevant of years here in 2023. 2009, after an overseas trip Biden took, multiple, that's in quotes, multiple women is just straight up, no quotes. They appear to be, that appears to be an accurate recounting of them. Multiple women, though, said they found the vice president, quote, sexy. And you know how that can be. We can't have that happening in America, I guess. The emails include schedules with ordinary family get-togethers. I guess where we're trying to get to here, or where Comer is trying to get to, is so many women found him sexy that just by the law of large numbers, eventually some of them would have had sexy time with him when he was vice president in 2009. So yada yada, 2023, impeach him. You get the idea, right? That guy, I accused that guy of having been sexy in 2009, and that's the sort of high crime and misdemeanor that no one can stand for. The emails include schedules with ordinary family get-togethers. That also sounds like dramatic music material. One shows Biden had lunch. Wait a minute, more dramatic music. Oh, I see. Lunch with Hunter Biden. Then 15-year-old daughters. Oh, okay, that's a letdown. One showed that Biden had lunch with Hunter Biden's daughters, who were then 15 years old. Their names are listed here, Maisie and Finnegan. How do you like that? Well, that's pretty Irish. Another reveals that the Ukrainians, Ukrainians always get dramatic music because of all people in the world, honestly. But 2009, the Ukrainians were praising his, that is to say, Hunter's now deceased brother, Beau. That is interesting, and I don't know what that's meant to mean, except that Ukrainians were talking about Biden's, just it wasn't Hunter, so that much more tenuous. And then there are the private musings of multiple Georgian women, not our Georgia, I think, probably the former Soviet Union's Georgia, maybe? I don't know. Multiple Georgian women saying they found Joe Biden sexy during a 2009 trip that also included a stop in Ukraine. I'm a little confused by it too because, well, one, I'm not certain what the crime is there. And two, certain women in our Georgia are quite open about finding Donald Trump sexy, and one of them sits in Congress. And we have been, unfortunately, tortured in the past with video footage of her, caressing the crotch of a giant Trump cardboard cutout at some point during one of her campaign events. That was fairly disgusting. And that's right here in our Georgia. But yeah, overseas, apparently in the other Georgia, some people found Joe Biden sexy. And then, look at this. Must read email below. Read an email, which must have been read in order for them to know that it says this. Must read email below. Read an email forwarded by Biden's then National Security Advisor, Tony Blinken, to Joe Biden and his sons, Hunter and Beau. The email subject line, Biden as new Georgian sex symbol. They were obviously having great fun with the fact that these headlines, or whatever they were, had been generated. And Tony Blinken thought it would be funny if all of them read that. And that is treason, and therefore something, like I said, impeachment and maybe execution. Other emails from the National Archives trove, which, again, I point out, are in the National Archives, include a June 14th, 2016 schedule. Everyone remembers what happened on June 14th, 2016, right? Treason, obviously. The schedule card from the archive shows Biden was to meet with the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Dramatic music once again, yes. Well, the newly unredacted portions show he was also scheduled to work out with his personal trainer. Let's use the horror dramatic music for that, because that would almost certainly be horrible. To work out with a personal trainer. They caught him, ladies and gentlemen, and thank God that they did. All right, so they were going to work out with a personal trainer and to dine with, well, once again, or this is the same dinner that they were talking about before. We're once again back at dining with Hunter's then 15-year-old daughters Maisie and Finnegan in the vice president's office. They didn't tell us that part last time. Can't believe they were using vice presidential dinnerware. Outrageous. Politico, noting that Republicans have yet to turn up direct evidence that Joe Biden benefited personally or that he took any official action as a result of those Hunter-Biden connections, also reveals a May 27, 2016 schedule card that includes a call with former Ukrainian president. Okay, Ukraine. Once again, dramatic music. This is awful. So damning. A call with former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Now, Hunter Biden was copied on the day's schedule, which is obviously criminal. It's already been reported that Biden was also due to attend the one-year anniversary of the passing of his son, Beau, back home in Delaware. Another major crime, obviously. I guess out of all of this, you could say, well, why was Hunter Biden copied on the president's schedule that day? Wink, wink, he's talking to former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Maybe. Well, on the one hand, we don't know how many times Hunter Biden is copied on his father's daily schedule. Maybe always. It's his father. Or maybe it was just a special occasion because he was talking with someone Ukrainian. I don't really know, but I'm sure the implication is supposed to be, well, Ukrainian, and so therefore crime. Comer, maybe, but, show the crime, I guess. That's the challenge. Comer has been pointing to this schedule item since it was also emailed to then Vice President Biden under a pseudonym email address. Well, that's obviously criminal as well. Comer even said the vice president was sending a secret message to his son that he was about to fire the prosecutor, except he wasn't firing anybody because he's a Ukrainian prosecutor. As recently as last week, Comer included that email on a list of, quote, evidence of Joe Biden's, quote, involvement in his family's influence peddling schemes. Politico also notes that Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, nominally anyway, and his allies insisted that opening a formal impeachment inquiry would empower them to dig deeper, yet the emails are another example of the House GOP failing to turn up evidence they've assured the public exists and that will implicate Biden in some form of corruption that rises to an impeachable offense. Yeah, not so much in this collection of items which actually made it all the way to the National Archives, which is a repeated and chronic problem for the other guy. I'm curious how Politico covered this, since this is where the story came from, and what headline they used. Remember, we're coming off of Sexy. Comer obtains unredacted emails to VP Biden revealing women privately mused they found him attractive. What is, does Politico pick up on the same? Yeah. All right. Sexy Biden and family get-togethers. Comer views new email details. Emails provided to House Oversight Chair Jim Comer included no smoking guns. That's right up there in the subheader. So not bad. And, okay, I see they didn't get this one past, this garbage past the Politico reporters because it was Heidi Przyzbala, who's, I think, one of their better, operatives there at Politico. And I think we've read her recently and had high praise for some of the work she was producing. So well done there for Heidi, seeing it clearly, and interesting that Politico kind of sees it more or less the same way as Raw's story, which is not always the case. So kudos then to, well, all the sexy people of Georgia. Thanks very much. If you want autographed photos of me, very sexily talking about this story, $50. I don't know. That's my fundraising pitch for the day. And thanks to Justice for bringing this horrific story to our attention. All right. Well, I wasn't planning on that one, but it's as good a stop as any. I mentioned to you the fact that Kevin McCarthy would one day like to become Speaker of the House. That's an interesting story. And in fact, it's what Greg is talking about today in the abbreviated Pundit Roundup. We usually reserve the Friday Pundit Roundup for discussion on Monday, but it occurs to me we will be off the air on Monday, and I need to alert Greg to that fact. It will be atoning for all of the dramatic music that we played earlier today, talking about sexy, sweet Georgia Joe Biden. And so off the air for that day. But let's see. You'll get a little extra Greg fix then to carry you through to Wednesday. But today's APR, Kevin McCarthy's, that is the possessive, Kevin McCarthy's chickens come home to roost as he loses floor control. These are metaphorical chickens, as is his control of the floor, by the way. And here's the lead off of the story. And I guess, we can cite some of the connective tissue that, Greg puts together for us. It's not that Kevin McCarthy lost control of the House floor this week over a rule to debate the defense appropriations bill. He lost control the day he was elected Speaker by giving up positions on the Rules Committee to the radicals. What happened this week was that he was exposed. Even the gossip sheet McCarthy whisperers can't defend him. What happens now? He'll have to negotiate with Democrats, and the first negotiation is over how soon now actually is. And let's see, some embedded tweets illustrating the issue here. What are we looking at? Anthony Adranya tweeting, woof, now 6 Republican nays on this rule vote. Would be second rule defeat this week alone. That's their new hobby, of course. That's, as we've pointed out a number of times, it's been a very, very, very long time since rules were really in danger of being defeated by the majority party standing, or offering up some opposition to them. The minority party almost always votes against the rule. But, to have it happen at all is huge. To have it happen more than once is equally huge. And this is, I think, the second time that multiple rules have gone down in the same week. So Anyway, it's pretty crazy. Let's see. Is this also related to it? Something from the Washington Post. House Republicans falter on funding plans as shutdown inches closer. I guess is their headline. The status of negotiations on legislation related to funding the government declined so severely Thursday. How severely did they decline? So severely that lawmakers began to return home with no votes scheduled for the rest of the week. Yeah, that is interesting, because you'll recall that we were marveling over Greg looking at the prospective schedule of work being done today and votes being taken tomorrow. And I was amazed at that. But instead, no votes scheduled because they don't know what the hell to do or what to vote on. And, of course, they can't bring those bills to the floor because they have no rule in place for debating them. Although you can, by the way, bring bills to the floor without rules. I mean, without passing a special rule anyway. It's a little messy and it's difficult to control, and that's why they don't do it. But you get, by default, an hour debate on the bill, and it would be open to amendment at any point, and that's what worries people who run the House floor. And, of course, it could take forever to get through all of the amendments. And when you're operating under that sort of open rule, the time can run on because, of course, even when you run out of time debating an hour, or you would be then debating amendments under, I think, the 5-minute rule. Every amendment would get 5 minutes for debate. But every time you run out of time, you can pull this old parliamentary trick, which we haven't seen, I don't know if we've seen it on C-SPAN in years, because very rarely does anything come to the floor under an open rule anymore, or even any kind of modified open rule that allows for this. But I haven't been watching C-SPAN as closely as I used to back in the day. But if you ever, either recently or in the distant past, watched people on the floor rise after being recognized, and, for what purpose does the gentleman from, well, we'll say me, Virginia, rise? And I would say, Mr. Chairman, I move to strike. I'm talking to the chairman of the House Committee of the Whole here. We're working on amending the bill, so we're not the House sitting as the House, and so I'm addressing the chair as chair, the chairman, and Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the requisite number of words, or I move to strike the last word. And what does that mean? It's a mock motion at that point. Remember, the difference between resolutions and motions. I'm not offering a different resolution. We're debating a resolution. But during the debate on the resolution, I move to strike the last word, or the requisite number of words. Why do they use those two? Why are we talking about this? Oh, well, all right. There's always an opportunity to give a lesson in parliamentary procedure. Moving to strike the last word. What last word? The last word of the amendment currently under debate. You see, the amendment that was offered is afforded under open rules. This is what would happen if there was no rule and they just moved the bill to the floor for debate anyway. The amendment being offered has run out of time. We got 5 minutes to debate it. We used it up. So what I do is I move that we now consider a different amendment, technically. What amendment would that be? I haven't written one. It's a fake. I don't really want to do anything with it, but I'm not going to call for a vote on it. I just want to debate it. And every amendment that's offered under open rules is entitled to 5 minutes of debate. So the amendment, I need to offer something. There needs to be something sitting here pretending to be an amendment in order for us to get the 5 minutes. So what I'd like to do is I move that we take the text of the amendment we're currently debating and strike the last word of it. So now it's a quote-unquote differently worded amendment. It's a brand new amendment now, and that's entitled to 5 minutes too. And then they would say the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes. Perhaps I may yield 2.5 of those minutes to a member opposed to my supposed amendment, but I don't know. Everybody just does it themselves. And so what ends up happening then is the next person that rises and says, that gentleman from Virginia is an idiot, I need to rise and speak. They too will rise for recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman from that stupid state that disagrees with me rise? And he would say, I move to strike the last word. Now, somebody may say, oh, whoa, we already struck the last word. To which he could say, I move to strike the last word of the amendment the guy from Virginia was talking about. It had one less word than the original amendment, so strike that word. Oh, okay. Or you could say, I move to strike the requisite number of words, because I don't know how many it's necessary, but I could say, I move to strike the last 2 words of the previous question that we were debating before we started this nonsense. And you can strike all the way back until you run out of words, I guess. Technically, I suppose somebody's supposed to, a parliamentarian might be interested in tracking the number of words that are left so that when you run out, you could say, there's no words to strike. You're going to have to do something else. But anyway, mostly they don't check because it doesn't go on for that long, although it can go on forever, technically. And that's why they pass special rules so that you can have some sense of control over the debate and how it's going to go. And I guess this is also why they say if you lose the rule vote, you begin to lose control of the floor. Either you're bringing a bill to the floor with no ability to control how long it will be debated and how it will be amended, or in some cases when you defeat a rule or you perhaps make a motion to recommit on the bill or things like that, then you give the minority the opportunity to propose either their own rule or their own version of the bill. And that, if you're trying to keep control, is something you want to desperately avoid. But that's how you lose control of the floor. And what happens if you do? And what happens if you go forward even when your rule loses? Like if it's absolutely imperative that we take up this spending bill or the government shuts down, you can bring it forward. There's just no telling how long it will take you to get through it. Does anybody remember ever seeing that? When was the last time? Someone could, I guess, search the congressional record and see when the last time that they operated under open rules was. It's actually quite fascinating and has nothing to do with how bad Kevin McCarthy is. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Kagro Morning Show. Alrighty. I moved at that point to strike the requisite number of words. I didn't say it was the last word. I struck a word in the middle of the sentence. The Kagro Morning Show. I mean, it works. I struck 2, as a matter of fact. So does everybody get that? I mean, you know, it's just a little bit of trivia and a great opportunity to do an impromptu, unplanned, unscripted parliamentary procedure lesson. And I think it's one we've taught before, but you never know. People may have joined the listenership in between occasional lessons on floor procedure. But it doesn't matter because that's not what's going on now, and that's not likely how they'll bring bills to the floor. But it was worth pointing out they're not without options. They can actually consider this bill, and they don't really. That probably answers some questions. What happens if you just don't pass a rule for a certain bill? Could you just bring it to the floor anyway? Yes, you can. Why don't you? Because it could be chaos, especially in this atmosphere. And with lunatics running the asylum, you never know what's going to happen. But has it ever happened before, or have we ever seen it? I don't know if I've ever seen a bill come to the floor just without a rule completely. Well, I guess you could consider bills considered under suspension of the rules, something like that. But it's really, it doesn't produce the same effect because, when you're considering bills under suspension of the rules, it takes a 2/3 vote to pass it. But the exchange is that in exchange for mustering a 2/3 vote, the suspension of the rules, it doesn't suspend all the damn rules, because one of the rules that's still in effect is no amendments are allowed on the bill being considered under suspension of the rules, which is a little odd. I wonder if anybody has ever stood up there and said, well, I want to amend this bill. Well, you can't because the rules say you can't. Yeah, but we moved to suspend the rules. Okay, yes, but we haven't suspended them yet. It takes a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules, and that's what the vote later is going to be. So I guess that's it. That's the answer of how they structure that. When you offer up one of those bills, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill. That's a compound motion. You're moving both to suspend the rules and to pass the bill. And then they recognize you for an hour, or it's actually 40 minutes, I think, when it's a suspension of the rules. And you yield 20 minutes of that time to the opposition, if there even is any. Usually it's just formality, and they speak in favor of the bill too. That's why it's being offered this way. Whatever, it's non-controversial. You debate your thing for some amount of time, up to 40 minutes. And then the chair entertains the motion to suspend the rules and pass the bill. And if there's 2/3, then the rules are suspended and the bill is passed, both things at once. Okay, so I've just answered my own question. It's been an awful long time since I've seen anything debated under the 5-minute rule. And part of the reason is because you don't know how long that's going to go on. It's a little bit like the vote-a-rama in the Senate when they are debating budget or reconciliation bills. Those things too are time limited and therefore not subject to the filibuster, but you have to sort of debate it, everything in quick succession, and you only get a couple of minutes to discuss anything you want to bring up. So the House version of the vote-a-rama, the open rules or 5-minute rule debate. Haven't seen it in some time. So what were we talking about? Oh yeah, why Kevin McCarthy is such a terrible speaker. He never actually gained the power that came with the gavel. He got the gavel, he got the office, and he got the lightning rod, but none of the control that appears to have used to go with the office. And part of that, as Greg keeps pointing out, is that one of the key mechanisms of the speaker's control is that the speaker has traditionally controlled the Rules Committee. And they, by rewriting the rules for each consideration of each bill, keep a tight lid on how things run on the floor. But in order to get the speakership, he had to cede control over who he was going to place on the Rules Committee. And I don't know whether he knew what he was getting into, or he just thought, okay, it's normal horse trading. You give away something in order to get something. I'll give away roles on this committee in order to get the speakership. It's entirely possible, because we're talking about Kevin McCarthy and he's not that smart and doesn't appear to know a great deal about how the House or government or the world actually operate. It's possible that he just thought of it like any other committee. Yeah, you want a seat on this dumb committee? Sure, I'll trade it to you in exchange for your vote. And not thinking, well, why am I going to be speaker if I'm not going to be able to control the Rules Committee? And on the other hand, it's entirely possible that he understands a great deal more than we think. He's just not capable of using it, both because he's not particularly competent and also he's dealing with a conference full of lunatics and nihilists. So I'm not certain anybody would be able to control that. But it may be the case that he knew he was giving it away, and he was just like, look, I don't really plan on making a lifestyle out of it. I just want to be able to say I was speaker. I want to be recorded in the books. I want to get the nice office. For the time being, I hang out here. It's a big headache. I can't govern, but I don't care. I never really wanted to govern anyway, and I'm going to retire and become a lobbyist or whatever very soon, and it doesn't matter to me. Or, it'll work itself out because it always has worked itself out. Or we're going to come to some agreement. But anyway, we're living with that now, and so is he. So where were we here? Republicans' inability to pass a single funding provision since returning to Washington last week, including twice failing to start debate on a Defense Department appropriations bill, is the latest embarrassment for the conference, whose direction is being dictated not by leaders, but by a handful of stubborn holdouts. That was the Washington Post's reporting on the situation. Let's see. Moving on to a different subject here in the roundup. So, anyway, I'll just throw that one out there. And, I did have a follow-up parked in pocket too, didn't I? Yes. Let's see. Oh, right. Steve Bannon's piece at MSNBC's Maddow blog, writing, surprise failure makes matters even worse for GOP's McCarthy. And when we say surprise failure, well, we modify that. Steve does right here in the subheader. The fact that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy failed again is a problem. The fact that he was surprised by his failure makes the problem much worse. None of us were surprised by the failure, of course. House Republican leaders originally planned to advance a defense spending bill last week. That would be, this week, really. Or maybe they planned to do it last week and it carried over into this week. I don't know. Anyway, only to discover that too many of their own members opposed the party's plan for the leadership to, okay. They basically discovered that so many of their own members opposed the party's plan that the leadership had to pull the legislation. It was, by any fair measure, embarrassing for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and his team. Okay, sure. But the California Republican and his leadership team got together, held several meetings, came up with a new plan, and brought the measure to the House floor Tuesday. So I guess, yes, they wanted to do it last week. It didn't work. They brought it again this week. It also didn't work. It failed, adding to McCarthy's intensifying troubles. Determined to overcome the setbacks, the House Speaker went back to work, held more meetings, and twisted more arms. As of 24 hours ago, McCarthy, confident that he'd put in the necessary work and secured the necessary support, was optimistic that he wouldn't fail again. As the legislative day got underway, the Washington Post reported, House Republicans on Thursday are expected to advance a Department of Defense appropriations bill after successfully appeasing some hard-right lawmakers. A few weeks later, the bill failed again. Sad trombone sound. A Politico report added some behind-the-scenes details that stood out, so much so that they are standing out right here as a pull quote. On Wednesday, we are told, Republicans left a closed-door conference meeting confident that they had the votes to move the defense bill after Representatives Ralph Norman of South Carolina and Ken Buck of Colorado told leadership that they would flip their votes on advancing the defense bill, allowing it to move to a full passage vote after helping to block it earlier this week. But Republicans ran back into trouble when Representatives Murdery, Trader Green, and Eli Crane, I don't think I've run into this guy, he's from Arizona, who had both voted for the rule earlier this week, flipped on Thursday and opposed it. That is pretty amazing, and what a huge, huge error that is. I guess they thought, all right, well, let's see. How many people will vote for the bill this time? It was less than 218 last time because we had some holdouts. Let's take the number of people who voted for the rule last time. I don't know what that number is, 210. And we need 8 votes. And they went out and secured 8 votes, including, I don't know what the number really was, including Ralph Norman and Ken Buck, and said, all right, with that, we have at least 218 votes. But they never bothered to say, are there any new no votes out there? You're changing the substance of the rule, and they're probably also, therefore, the bill. Should we check with all of our yes votes to make sure they're still yes votes. And they said, meh, because ordinarily on a rule, that just doesn't happen. But ordinarily, complete idiot space cases like Murdery Trader Green are not in Congress. They are cranks who call C-SPAN and scream about Congress, or who are doing, YouTube live streams about how space aliens and their Jewish space lasers are controlling Congress and we hate them. But now they're actually in Congress, and there's no telling when they're going to go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and you got to check on these people all the time. But it's so unpleasant to talk to them. I can't fault them entirely for skipping over it when they think they can. But there you go. As Steve points out, it's a basic element of Congress 101. Good House speakers avoid surprises. They craft a strategy, formulate a plan, listen to members, count heads, and bring measures to the floor when they're ready to pass. They know what's going to happen because they're running the show, or because they have a lot of help too. I mean, they don't do it alone, right? Good House speakers are able to effectuate that game plan over and over every single time. Everything that comes to the floor goes through this procedure. Sounds like a lot of work. What do? If you're a busy House speaker, you turn to your House whip. The House whip has deputies, deputies, and regional whips, and it's a whole organization, it's a whole network, and you split the House up. What a pain in the ass it has to have to check with all 210 members who voted for the rule last time. It seems like such a pain in the ass. It is. You give it to the whip organization, and they have 24 regional whips, state whips, informal whips from different caucuses, but you divide it up and you say, all right, if there's 10 of us working this question and there's 210 yes votes from the rule last time, each one of us asked 21 members. That's not a huge list for a whip organization. They usually have even more of them. Everybody's responsible for 6 to 8 members. Then report back to your captain, your precinct captain, and we go up the chain until you get back to me tomorrow. Everybody has now spoken to a half dozen to 10 members who voted yes last time. Are they still going to vote yes? Sometimes they lie, sometimes they hedge, whatever. But at least you get some intelligence report. They didn't even appear to do that, unless it was straight up, Murdery Trader Green saying, yes, I'm a yes, when she knew she was going to be a no. Or maybe she forgot, or she went crazy at the last second. There's no explaining what she's doing, but they ended up not predicting her U-turn. So anyway, these steps might very well seem obvious, and they do. They are Congress 101, but remember, these guys never learned that lesson. They've never run anything, and they're dealing with people who will say yes but mean no. But honestly, every speaker has dealt with at least some of those. Anyway, these steps might very well seem obvious, but this week served as a timely reminder that McCarthy still struggles with this straightforward process. And he may never have had the ability to pull it off because he just didn't have the loyalists available to him. No one's loyal to this guy. So it's never going to work. Indeed, the fact that the House Speaker was caught off guard yesterday strikes me, Steve Bannon, hi everybody, as one of the most significant dimensions to the larger story. Much of the commentary this week is focused on the GOPS divisions, fueled by radicals at odds with their leaders. By this reasoning, McCarthy only deserves part of the blame because it's not his fault the extremists in his conference are eager to engage in ridiculous antics. Well, except to the extent that he gave money, time, and effort to help elect them in the first place and never participated in a practice of culling the complete idiot wackadoodles out of the process. But maybe that was impossible in certain cases. The Republican leader was eager to push this line as the legislative day wrapped up. This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the whole place down, McCarthy told reporters. That doesn't work. We could place blame for that elsewhere, I suppose, in the sense that I guess it harkens back all the way to Newt Gingrich's campaign in a box idea. The original idea, of course, was, well, we want to fill the ranks of the Republican conference here in the House with local Republican businessman types, and we do mean man, businessman types, who may not know anything about governance or Congress or anything like that. They just want their taxes to be lower. We can work with that kind of person. So they campaign on being a local small business person, and everybody goes, says, yeah, rah-rah to that, and Republicans rally to that. But they need to be able to say things that make them sound like they know what they're going to do when they go to Washington. So here's the box. Read these note cards out of the box. Like, it's not enough entirely all by itself to say, well, I just want low taxes. Well, what do you mean? Well, we should have this, or we should lower the inheritance tax or death taxes, as we call them. And we should crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse, and welfare queens, and people who are abusing the earned income tax credit. But people who aren't abusing it should get more, but people who are abusing it should get nothing. Or whatever. You had talking points that made you sound like you had, in fact, bought the suit you were wearing, as opposed to having it given to you as a random person on the street and just talking out of your ass. Now, of course, the box can be given to anyone. In Newt's day, they gave it to more or less vetted local business people. You actually had to meet that criteria. I do own a local business, and this is what it is. It's unsuccessful. That's why I'm running for Congress instead of staying here making money. But at least they were pretty sure the person had the business. Now they're not, right? George Santos, I don't know, local businessman, maybe. He's got a suit. I don't know. Here, have the box. What about you? You have a local business? Sure, I have a CrossFit gym, and my dad had a construction business, but mostly I am a YouTube yodeler, and I follow teenagers from Parkland High School around and harass them. Or was it Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School? Is that in Parkland? Is that what I'm thinking? Okay, well, anyway, I follow kids around and scream at them on videotape. Fine. That's a local business. You too. So they just started giving the campaign in a box away to anybody, and they didn't pay any attention to, will they be able to do the job, or are they crazy? And now they are where they are. So anyway, back to Steve's commentary here. There's at least some truth to that. That is, that this is a whole new concept of individuals who just want to burn the whole place down. That's what McCarthy said. Some truth to that, though I, Steve Bannon, hello again, would take issue with the idea that this is new, but the House Speaker's effort to avoid responsibility has its limits. McCarthy was the one who thought he had the votes. McCarthy was the one who brought the bill to the floor. Well, Scalise, it's his job, but, he cleared the way for it. Indifferent to the fact that it wouldn't pass the Senate, even if it did manage to clear the House. That's true. McCarthy was the one who didn't know he didn't have the votes. That's true, too. This, as much as anything else, raises questions about the GOP leader's competence. Exactly 10 years ago this month, as House Republicans pushed the nation closer to a government shutdown, then Speaker John Boehner struggled mightily to convince his members to act responsibly. I wrote at the time that the Ohio Republican had become effectively Speaker in name only. A decade later, the Sino label has returned. The Chinese are objecting to that, probably. As a Semaphore report explained, there's been rampant speculation about whether hardline Republicans will eventually try to oust McCarthy from his job, especially after Representative Matt Gaetz, his most vocal antagonist, left a copy of a motion to vacate sitting in the bathroom this week, but on purpose, apparently. But even though he's still holding the gavel for now, McCarthy already feels a bit like a speaker in name only. They actually used that phrase. So key points for Steve in bringing that one back up. Okay, so that's where we sit. I happened to notice on Blue Sky this morning, everybody's good old Twitter friend, LOL GOP, sending out the message this morning. Important thing to remember is Donald Trump is actually the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House, and this is exactly what he wants to happen. And that's a big laugh line, except that I recall, and you probably do too, when that was, in fact, once the overt fantasy that certain Republicans were publicly floating, making Donald Trump Speaker of the House, which, of course, was an acknowledgement on their part that he had not won the 2020 election, although they might have been floating it ahead of Election Day and saying, if he loses, they were still assuming if he loses, he won't try to overthrow the government and I won't try to help. But that fell by the wayside. But if he loses and there's nothing we can do about it, but we still retain control or take over control of the House, well, why don't we make him Speaker of the House and then go forward with our plans to impeach Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for nothing, just as they're about to do in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court justice. The fact that they wouldn't have a crime in front of them at that point wouldn't matter, although they had already made up the Ukrainian Burisma crime, so they would just use that and then make the then Republican Speaker of the House, if they managed to pull that plan off and install Donald Trump as Speaker, he would constitutionally become acting president. I forgot my acting button. Acting! Yeah, that kind of president. Not that he would actually act in any way. But anyway, so who was floating that idea? Well, as it turns out, one of the biggest, most vocal proponents of that extremely dumb and weird idea was Matt Gaetz. And he may even have nominated Trump during the speakership vote. I don't remember what he did, but maybe. And that was supposed to be a joke from LOL GOP, but they actually thought about doing that. And so instead of actually installing him as Speaker of the House, and people did debate that at the time, like he'll never take that job because that's actual work. He'll never do it. But I don't know. I thought that was overestimating his understanding of what work is and how he would feel about the obligations of doing the work. He'd take the job in order to create chaos, pull down a couple hundred G's as well of government money, put it in his pocket, and then just not do the work. And we would all say, but he's not doing the work. He shouldn't get the pay. And everybody would say, well, I don't know what to do. Constitution. You can't. And he's constitutional officer, not a member of Congress, but, some question mark. That's actually interesting because there's constitutional provisions that say that members of Congress can't have their compensation changed, without an intervening election, either up or down. So they're constitutionally guaranteed their money, which is one of the problems, let's say, with something that gets proposed every once in a while. Now that we're nearing a government shutdown again, very frequently, members of Congress love to float this one, knowing that it has no possibility of force because the Constitution stands in the way. So they feel very confident in getting out there and saying, well, I think if there's a government shutdown, members of Congress shouldn't get paid while the government is closed. That'd change things. Then they'd get their act together and get things done, even though most of the members of Congress are millionaires. They don't really care about their congressional salary. There are some who depend on it, but it doesn't matter because the Constitution forbids withholding their salaries from them anyway, and also likewise forbids raising their salaries without an intervening election. 27th Amendment, I think. That one squeaked by. It's my favorite one because it's the one that took 200 plus years to actually ratify. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, I guess, except that I can't remember what the here and there were before we started this tangent. So anyway, oh yeah, right, Matt Gaetz. And the fantasy of installing Donald Trump. But how do we get to the pay thing? Oh yeah, right. He wouldn't care. He wouldn't care about collecting his pay. And I don't know whether you could take it away from him, except again, ordinarily speakers of the House are usually members of Congress and protected from losing their salary that way. It's also not entirely clear that there's additional salary that members of the House who assume the role of a speaker get. But it's not clear that there's a salary set anywhere for the Speaker of the House if he's not a member of Congress. I don't even know what they do with that, but it wouldn't matter very much to Donald Trump. Anyway, I was more worried about his pulling mischief, like once he found out that technically speaking, it's the Speaker of the House who makes the hall of the House available to the president and invites the president to address the nation for the State of the Union address. that he would say, well, the hell with it. I'm not going to extend the invitation. And no, you can't use the hall of the House. Go give the state. If you want to give a State of the Union, do it at somebody else's invitation and do it wherever else. Now, poor President of the United States with no ability to commandeer an appropriate setting, telegenic setting for a State of the Union address. Right? Like if, imagine the effects. It would be great. Donald Trump would be thinking he'd have this huge win. I'm going to deny him the use of the hall of the House and, that classical setting for the State of the Union. My fellow Americans, I join you tonight for the State of the Union address live from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, dramatically lit from behind and underneath. And Donald Trump would grind his teeth, whatever they are. Whatever's in his mouth there, whether they're real teeth or not, into powder, thinking, I can't believe that I gave away this moment. In fact, I can't believe that I didn't think to give the State of the Union address from the Lincoln Memorial. Okay, well, that's all dispensed with. Kevin McCarthy in some serious trouble trying to find his way in this job, if indeed that's something that he wants to do. More congressional drama to share with you after the upcoming top of the hour break. And then we can move on to some other stuff that doesn't have anything directly to do with Congress, but is, very much the subject of the morning's chatter. Let's see. I don't know. We're coming up on the break, but not enough time to just cut out. So how about if we give you some idea of the last bit of congressional drama? I happened to pick up this piece from the Intercept, which I thought was interesting and demonstrates the very real ways in which different campaign activities can be interpreted. AIPAC, not a favorite for a lot of people. AIPAC, America-Israel Political Affairs Action, whatever committee. AIPAC targets black Democrats while the Congressional Black Caucus stays silent. Ooh, what's going on here? AIPAC has given at least $3.6 million to the CBC's old guard since last year, while members of the squad draw the Israel lobby's ire. What's happening here, of course, AIPAC, relatively conservative-leaning group, and I'm a little bit behind on the music now, unhappy, understandably, I guess, although really they should start to see if there's any way they can get over their irritation with Representative Ilhan Omar in particular, and the various comments she's made in the past, and we kind of know where she's coming from, and you should kind of expect it by now and learn to kind of play around it, but they never did. They're targeting her, and we'll see what kind of problems it causes. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ready for the problems that we were wondering about? Okay, so yes, AIPAC, I understand why they just won't let it go with Ilhan Omar, although apparently there's more than just her involved in their targeting. And AIPAC has very few fans, I would think, among the listenership of the show, but probably some who are at least partially sympathetic to some of their outlook. But AIPAC tends to get themselves in trouble with progressive Democrats pretty quickly. There are other Jewish and Israel-interested organizations that do much better at walking a finer line with progressives. But here's the story Akila Lacey is reporting for The Intercept. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the country's, not just the counties, but the country's most influential pro-Israel lobbying group, is recruiting candidates to challenge progressive members of the Congressional Black Caucus in primaries next year. And, this already is sort of like inflammatory discussion of it. And it's true. It's accurate to say that, technically speaking, this is exactly what's happening. But yeah, the question this is framing up is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee targeting members of the Congressional Black Caucus because they're members of the Black Caucus, or are they targeting them for different reasons and they happen to be members of the Black Caucus? Well, You can make up your mind for yourself, but yeah, I think probably the more accurate thing is, well, there are people who have been outspoken in their criticism of Israel, and that's why they're targeting them. And though I disagree with that sometimes, I don't know, exactly what's going on here, but generally speaking, I'm skeptical of what they're doing and I want to examine it. But yes, they also, another very fair way of looking at it is, well, a lot of people are very weird about Israel, including a lot of white Republican evangelicals who are pretty clear about why they, quote unquote, support Israel. They want to make sure that Israel is packed to the rafters with Jews who will be slaughtered by the thousands when the apocalypse comes, which is not really supporting Israel. We've kind of been over this ground, but they're focusing their time and attention on replacing members of, well, they happen to be black members of Congress and are outspoken in opposition or in criticism of certain aspects of the Israeli government at the minimum. But on the other hand, it's like an understandable thing. Like, okay, where is AIPAC likely to be able to influence the outcome of the election more? In lunatic, Republican, evangelical, dominionist districts? No. But in the kinds of heavily Democratic districts that their most strident progressive critics come from, yes, they probably would be able to find very likely another black candidate from a majority black district, which is almost guaranteed to go with Democrats in the general election. And they can claim, well, we've done no harm to Democratic prospects in this. We're just electing a different kind of black Democrat in these districts. What's the harm there? And that's what keeps, I think, the rest of the Congressional Black Caucus frozen in place. A lot of them do get a lot of support from AIPAC and are glad to have it. And looking at things politically, well, you're going to bring me another black Democrat from this district. Actually, that wouldn't be very bad for me politically. I'd probably find them a much easier ally to work with here than I have found to be the case perhaps with Ilhan Omar, especially as she keeps antagonizing AIPAC. And I have some AIPAC people in my district who are big supporters of mine, and I want to placate them. So there's a lot happening here, but yes, the Intercept is inclined to take this sort of view and to present this story this way, but they're not wrong. These are members of the Congressional Black Caucus. They are being targeted, and the rest of the Congressional Black Caucus isn't stepping in to defend them. Though, again, the part that's being left out is they fully expect to have different congressional black Democrats in their place, and the size of their caucus will remain the same. They won't have gained anybody new, but they won't have lost anybody. But they will have gained somebody who probably plays ball the same way they do. And that's not something that many of them can say about Ilhan Omar, let's say. Just to pick an example. But, okay, so you see where they're coming from, the Intercept. Not wrong, but there's more to it than meets the eye, and that's why we're reading the story. The CBC, the second paragraph begins, has been silent on the AIPAC bid to challenge at least 3 of its members, who are part of the so-called Squad, a loose group of progressive Democrats, progressive representatives, in fact, it says. According to the media reports and the Intercept's investigation, the only incumbents AIPAC has targeted so far in this election cycle are CBC members. So, like I said, while it's probably not the case that they're saying, you know who we should screw with? Black Democrats. That's the upshot of what they're saying, and that does happen. And I guess I would compare it to other situations we've examined in the past, both on the show and even prior to the start of the show when I was writing on congressional matters for the front page at Daily Kos and pointing out, for instance, that following the 2006 elections, when Democrats regained control of the House and wanted to sort of have new blood in charge of their committees, but and to sort of push aside sort of some of the old timers, old line Democrats, and, you know, replace them with the new thinkers. They weren't necessarily the greatest bunch of thinkers, but they represented the new generation of leadership in Congress. But what they realized was that in order to do so, they would have to push aside the seniority system, which I think they correctly viewed as ossified and poorly regarded by rank and file Democrats. But it also meant that most of the people targeted for replacement were members of the Congressional Black Caucus who had patiently built their seniority and waited their chance to lead major committees in Congress. And it just so happened that all the people who were being pushed out were CBC members. But nobody at the time really went that extra step and said, this is racism. But you certainly could have made that claim, because just the same here. It's only Congressional Black Caucus members that are being targeted. But then again, it's only 3 people out of 200 who are being targeted too. Anyway, the CBC's silence on the electoral challenges reflects the divide among Democrats on Israel, with progressives increasingly willing to buck Capitol Hill orthodoxies and speak up for Palestinian rights, and fundraising dynamics among caucus members. AIPAC has endorsed more than half of CBC members. The AIPAC-backed members of the caucus, some 31 lawmakers, have received previously unreported totals of about $3.6 million from AIPAC since February of 2022, according to Federal Election Commission records. At two, a little bit misleading. I don't know. I feel like I got to call out every single thing at the Intercept sometimes. They like, you know, they're pointed in their coverage, and they love to do stuff like this. And it's not always, it doesn't always meet with my approval. Like, for instance, this is a good point, and at least they make it outright. But the conclusion that they're looking for you to come away with is, well, you know, the only people they're posing a challenge to, the only Democrats being challenged by AIPAC are black members. So, you know, maybe there's some bias there. On the other hand, they do point out, well, you know, more than half of the caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, is endorsed by AIPAC, and they've given them a tremendous amount of money. They do throw their weight behind lots of black members. More than half of the black members there are supported by AIPAC. Then there's this weird, technically, I guess, if you look at it just right, correctly reported, the idea that, what did they say? AIPAC-backed members of the caucus, oh yes, right, have received a previously unreported total of at least $3.6 million from AIPAC since February 22. And so unreported in what sense? Because, of course, they point out, how do we know that they've gotten this $3.6 million? Well, that's according to Federal Election Commission records, which, of course, suggests that it's been reported. Oh, we meant reported in the newspaper. Like, no newspaper to date has totaled up how much money AIPAC has given to members of the Congressional Black Caucus. At least they haven't done it in terms of how much since February of 2022. So we're the first ones to make that calculation. So therefore, it's previously unreported. Not that they were secret donations made under the table in order to avoid federal reporting requirements or anything like that. So that's a little shady too, if you ask me. The silence has given rise, the silence from the rest of the caucus, I guess, has given rise to calls for the CBC to speak up for members under attack, especially given AIPAC's propensity for directing Republican money to challenge incumbent progressive Democrats in primaries. And I don't recall specifically that that's a huge problem with the way they operate, but it does ring a bell, and I certainly wouldn't put it past them. And there's certainly a lot of Republicans, people who are effectively Republicans or who are outright Republicans, who support AIPAC, and it's not exclusively a Democratic endeavor. And so, yeah, they probably will meddle in Democratic primaries with Republican money that way. AIPAC and its Republican donors are intentionally targeting progressive members of the Congressional Black Caucus with right-wing primary challenges, said Alexandra Rojas, the executive director of Justice Democrats, that's the AOC affiliated organization, I believe, which backed all 5 CBC members from the squad. The CBC and every caucus in Congress has the opportunity now to demonstrate their power and stand up for all incumbents against AIPAC's role in funneling GOP dollars into Democratic primaries. All right. But I guess I should mention at some point that I don't know how accurate the charge has always been, but I'm pretty sure that I have heard in the past, and maybe it's just rumor mongering and jockeying for position, but certainly Justice Democrats and affiliated organizations have themselves been accused in the past of meddling in primaries, sometimes very possibly with Republican dirty tricks money too. And the big knock against Justice Democrats and the squad, etc., one of them, and big knocks, has been their willingness to fight in Democratic primaries, to knock off people that they consider to be too conservative in their Democrat-ness. They are often Democrats, but they will challenge sitting Democrats too. It's a little much to see the Justice Democrats saying that the charge here is that AIPAC is challenging incumbents. That's what's bad. Because you challenge incumbents. You reserve that right. You always have. That's been your thing. That's how you're here. That's why AOC is in Congress. And I'm glad she is. And she's been fantastic in Congress. And she's a dramatic improvement over Joe Crowley. And so great. But it's, like I say, it's a little rich to see them saying, everybody needs to band together to get these guys out of playing in Democratic primaries. And it's also a bit much to say that, well, what they're doing here is funding right-wing primary challenges. Maybe the right wing of what passes for Democrats. And there are certainly some conservative ones out there, but they're not playing for the most part, not a whole lot in the majority black districts. The people who are conservatives there are progressives on the whole. Anyway, not Justice Democrat progressive, but pretty progressive nonetheless. So it's a little bit of a semantical game, but that they are playing the same game everybody else is. It's not like they've invented a new one and it's beyond the pale at any point. And we don't say that about issues involving Jews, remember? Because we don't know what pale they're talking about. Anyway, AIPAC is seeking to challenge CBC members Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Jamal Bowman of New York, also, both because of their support for putting restrictions on U.S. aid to Israel, apparently. Jewish Insider reported last month. That's just 2, so I'm waiting to see where the third one comes down. According to 3 sources with knowledge of the recruiting process, who asked for anonymity to protect professional relationships, AIPAC asked Pittsburgh area Democrat Lindsey Powell to challenge Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania. Powell declined. Allegheny County Controller Corey O'Connor, that's a lot of C's in there, also declined an AIPAC invitation to challenge Lee, according to 2 of the sources. Powell declined to comment, and O'Connor did not respond to a request for comment. But that's just 2 different ways of saying they got no comment out of them. Bhavini Patel, a council member in the city of Edgewood, Pennsylvania, is reportedly planning to run against Lee. Well, that's a different color of person of color, isn't it? That's interesting. Jewish Insider reported that it was unable to confirm if AIPAC had met with Patel. Patel did not respond to a request for comment. It's, I guess, open question. But yeah, that's interesting. They can't really at this point yet hang Patel's interest around the neck of AIPAC here. While AIPAC declined to respond to specific questions about its involvement in the challenges against CBC members, the pro-Israel lobby defended its record supporting black candidates for Congress. Some of their best friends are black candidates for Congress. Ay, ay, ay. Anyway, AIPAC proudly endorsed more than half, I mean, is that really such a huge accomplishment? More than half the Black Caucus last cycle and United Democracy Project, an AIPAC-backed super PAC, helped ensure pro-Israel African-American Democrats in Ohio, North Carolina, and Maryland won their elections, an AIPAC spokesperson said in a statement to The Intercept. While we have not made any decisions on specific races this cycle, we are constantly evaluating every seat held by a detractor of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and we base our assessments exclusively on their anti-Israel votes and statements, as is their right. The CBC did not respond to a request for comment. Next up, Old Guard versus the Squad. 5 black progressive officials have joined the CBC's ranks since 2019. Their additions strained already shifting dynamics in the caucus, which has long been governed by traditional structures of seniority and patronage, which makes it sound ossified and bad at its heart. And that's aligned with the Intercept's ethos and their approach to things in general. But again, I remind you of the story highlighted in my memory most clearly in the post-2006 election scenario, in which the drive to purge the old and ring in the new had decidedly racist, or racial, I should say, racial overtones. Here I'm actually using the downgrading to racial overtones, I think, correctly. We often criticize other outlets for incorrectly reducing or minimizing the racist tendencies by calling them racial or racially charged or racially tinged. But I think it would be correct to say that here. But yeah, that's sort of long been the Intercept's ethos, out with the old, in with the new. But it didn't bother them that there were racial overtones in 2006. There was no Intercept in 2006, but the people who behind the Intercept, and if you've been around long enough, you remember who the founders are. I guess don't hide the ball, Ryan Grimm. And, I don't think he'd be embarrassed to own up to that position. That's something we disagreed with, about then and probably still do now. But he tends to want to cast these things in this light, and that too is his right, just as it's my right to push back here. So, now again, they're into the out with the old and in with the new, and whether or not it's actually driven by Israel politics, I think it's just added bonus for them. They've just sort of always been about out with the old and in with the new. And it's legit. And it has repercussions. The caucus has sometimes stood against the new crop of rising black progressives. Yes, sometimes true, because they tend to try to want to, rightly, ride the coattails of out with the old, in with the new, because, of course, it benefits them and their preferred policies. But it does ignore the fact that a lot of the old haven't been in leadership and have been patiently amassing seniority in the hopes that this colorblind system, or ostensibly colorblind system, would one day afford them leadership opportunity because of their long-standing service. And just as they were on the cusp of cashing that check in the name of out with the old, in with the new, they were going to be pushed aside not only, maybe not by non-members of the Black Caucus, and I guess it's slightly better that they would be pushed aside by members of the Black Caucus from the Black Democratic perspective, but from people who, in their view, hadn't paid their dues, but who also didn't believe in dues paying. But later on will believe in dues paying when inevitably the next generation comes to try and push them out. This is a recurring phenomenon. This happens all the time. We've discussed this on the show as well, about how it was out with the old and in with the new when Dean Democrats took over the party, and then out with the old and in with the new when Bernie Sanders aligned activists came into their own, and they were going to push out the old ossified Democratic structure, which had only been there for about 10 years because they were in fact Dean people. but it was interesting to watch the people who had previously pushed out the old and promoted the new be pushed out after 10 years. And it happens all the time. Anyway, the old people that were pushed out by the Dean activists were themselves out with the old and with the new activists in their day. So, like I said, it happens over and over again. Now, the caucus has sometimes stood against this new crop of rising black progressives. The CBC bet against Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts in 2018 and backed her white incumbent opponent, former Representative Mike Capuano. Again, CBC backed him. But again, that's what makes it so rich now for the Justice Democrats to be saying, we need to be backing incumbents, not challengers. Well, that isn't the principle. You know that's not the principle. You shouldn't have said that. That's probably the worst thing you could have said. That undermines your case entirely, and I'll call it out every time. Because I want to. Because it's fun. And it's an effective cudgel against you, because it was disturbing to see... It was disturbing to see you on the other side of it when I knew that in 5 years' time you would be back screaming about how important it was to defend incumbents, because that's the cycle. Anyway, Pressley won and joined the CBC. Now, she could have held out and said, no, you screwed me over, but she didn't. Bowman angered the old guard of the caucus when he endorsed progressive candidate Cori Bush in her 2020 primary in Missouri against Representative William Lacey Clay, a centrist who had been a CBC member for 2 decades. Bush also won and joined the CBC. Divisions on Israel in the CBC, however, go beyond election alliances to policy stances and votes. Since taking office, progressive CBC members, including Omar, Bowman, Lee, Bush, and Pressley, have criticized human rights abuses against Palestinians or voted against military aid to Israel. They were among the 10 House Democrats who voted against a July resolution to absolve Israel of being an apartheid state. The critical stance on U.S. support for Israel drew AIPAC's ire, with the group ramping up its efforts to challenge the CBC incumbents. AIPAC's, but again, it's interesting because, here, even in this paragraph, well, you see, divisions on Israel are more important because they go beyond election alliances to policy stances and votes, which raises it to, in their view, a more substantive and more important level. Okay, maybe. Interesting. What is interesting, though, here, by the end of the paragraph, it's, again, a matter of how you characterize the dispute. Well, it isn't about election alliances. It's about policy stances. Well, it isn't about these people standing in opposition to AIPAC's policy and substantive positions. It's the fact that they are ramping up efforts to challenge CBC incumbents. It's once again, well, it's not because of policy, it's because they're black. But that's not actually what they're saying. It's what you're pointing out happens to be true, and what you think is, I guess, supposed to be their sub rosa agenda. But the agenda is pretty clear and pretty overt. Why you're substituting CBC membership for policy difference when at the start of the paragraph, the very same paragraph, you said, the more important disagreement, even more important than election alliances, is policy stance. The most important thing you could consider. Well, that's what they're considering here, but you want to reduce it to that they're black. That's kind of weird. AIPAC's shifting campaign strategy, because they're shifty, you see, presents contradictions for the CBC. The caucus's leaders have close relationships with AIPAC, but the group has also historically put an emphasis on the importance of protecting incumbents, like all groups. Something they love to criticize about the DCCC, for instance. Since 2022, the CBC's top AIPAC recipients include Representatives Glenn Ivey of Maryland, who has taken $756,000 from the group, House Democratic Caucus leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York, who has taken $485,300, Representative Valerie Foushee, I don't think I know her, but I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, of North Carolina, who has taken $456,800. Representative Richie Torres of New York, who has taken $459,900. And Chantel Brown of Ohio, who has taken $349,600. And they revel in the large dollar totals, but they are real, I'm sure. Jeffries, who has led congressional efforts to protect incumbents against primary challengers, because that's actually his job, and it's the job that they're hoping CBC will do on behalf of their squad members, but somehow it's terrible when Jeffries does it. He's a close ally of AIPAC, as are CBC leader Representative Stephen Horsford of Nevada and CBC PAC leader Representative Gregory Meeks. Okay, keeping an eye on the time here. Almost time for our break. CBC members have regularly led and attended AIPAC's annual trips to Israel, conferences, and other events. Horsford, Meeks, and CBC PAC did not provide comment for this story. The alliance has put CBC members at odds. Omar and Bush joined other progressives in protesting an official congressional address by Israel President Isaac Herzog in July, amid efforts to radically politicize the country's judiciary system. Of course, that's the work of Bibi Netanyahu, the president of Israel, different person from the prime minister of Israel.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, I realize we're spending a lot of time on this subject, but yeah, I think it's got some interesting nuances and well worth discussing to this point. We'll see whether it outlives its usefulness. There's a bit left to this article. We left off, though, by noting that the alliance has put CBC members at odds. Omar and Bush joining other progressives in protesting the official address by Israel's president, not prime minister, but president Isaac Herzog, in July, amid the efforts to radically politicize the country's judiciary system. Jeffries said he welcomed Herzog, quote, with open arms. And really, honestly, you know what? We're going to give that one a dramatic music moment, too, because that's what you say when an ostensible ally's president, and not prime minister, by the way, but president, visits in an official capacity. And you set aside the policy differences and strains for discussion by the diplomats later on. That's not the most incriminating sentence I've ever heard uttered in my life, and calling it out specifically, well, it supports a particular narrative. But again, I will say, thank God for the Intercept and its interest in promoting narratives. Sometimes I like the narratives, sometimes a little less so, but hiding from narratives and pretending you're neutral on everything is the problem we have with the rest of the media. The Intercept occupies a very specific niche in my daily information intake, and they'll stay there, despite my disagreements about things like this. More centrist CBC members and their political allies have been involved in combating progressive gains in the Democratic Party. In June of 2021, Jeffries, along with Representatives Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey and Terry Sewell of Alabama, another recipient of AIPAC cash, launched Team Blue PAC. Boo, not Team Blue. To protect Democratic members facing primary challenges from their left. But remember that incumbent protection is suddenly the primary obligation of the CBC from the position of the Justice Democrats looking to protect the seats of their members and allies from among the squad. So we have differing opinions depending on what time it is about the importance of incumbent protection. Anyway, last June, Democratic operatives closely aligned with CBC leaders launched a new dark money group to fend off primary challenges. And of course, then they have the open one called the DCCC, which generally is about fending off primary challenges across the board. In their individual capacities, however, some of the centrist CBC members are supporting their progressive colleagues, which means it's nothing across the board, and you have to look at individual cases. After news broke that AIPAC was recruiting Omar's challenger, Jeffries endorsed her last month. But a minute ago, he was a huge evil guy for welcoming someone from Israel, the president of Israel, with open arms when he was politely addressing the House. So for some observers, Jeffries' ascendancy in Democratic leadership and many CBC members' support of it complicates the political calculus. Yes, it's actually quite complicated. To invite a fight with an influential group like AIPAC could prove folly for Jeffries, souring relationships in the wider Democratic caucus where the group still holds sway. And remember, he's still trying to remain in charge of a unified Democratic caucus. So, yeah, some balancing might be necessary. Some of the older members have trouble letting go, said one senior Democratic strategist who requested anonymity in order to speak freely. And I think more than anything, they want a black Speaker of the House, not protecting progressive members. So if you're choosing between the two, the more important goal would be to have a black Speaker of the House than protecting progressives. It's your job to get elected as a progressive and to keep getting reelected. So you take care of that, and we'll take care of a different goal. It's legit as an approach. You may or may not love it. You may have varying disagreements with it. Jeffries' spokesperson, Christy Stevenson, declined to say whether Jeffries planned to endorse Lee and Bowman, but said Jeffries would keep backing Democratic incumbents across the political spectrum. Leader Hakeem Jeffries intends to continue his practice of supporting the re-election of every single House Democratic incumbent, she said, from the most progressive to the most centrist, and all points in between. And remember that our points end at centrist these days, and you should be happy about that. AIPAC's Republican money comes under scrutiny next, and yeah, that is a strange and complicating factor. It's not a Democratic PAC, per se. Though I think chiefly, yes. The rift between AIPAC and progressive CBC members reflects a broader disconnect between more senior and moderate CBC members and the caucus's small but growing progressive wing. Those frictions have bled into other recent primary elections. CBC members reportedly pushed former Representative Mondaire Jones to run against Bowman last year. Bowman is one of the 5 progressive squad members who are also part of the CBC. The CBC should be sounding the alarm and should be concerned, said Democratic strategist Camille Rivera, a partner at New Deal Strategies. We need to be very careful about letting power and influence change the overall goal of the caucus, which is to protect black incumbents and expand representation, especially those that have been doing the work and representing their constituents. We shouldn't let any entity try to divide and conquer. AIPAC's attacks on black progressives are not new. The group funneled money from GOP donors to back the more centrist Brown's successful House campaigns against Ohio progressive Nina Turner. And the group spent $4 million to try to thwart Lee's insurgent 2022 campaign. Even powerful progressives have fallen amid the Israel lobby's attacks. Endorsements from former Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton and Representative Nancy Pelosi weren't enough to help the former Representative Donna Edwards of Maryland overcome the $6 million AIPAC spent against her in her bid to reclaim her House seat. Pelosi, a pro-Israel stalwart, and at the time the Speaker of the House, rebuked AIPAC for its attacks against Edwards. Her opponent, Ivy, the top CBC recipient of AIPAC cash, won the primary by 16 points and went on to win the general election by a landslide. I don't think they may have edited out the original introduction of Ivy in this story. I don't recall them making earlier mention, but just to refer by surname at this point suggests that they did. Anyway, AIPAC's strategy fits into a larger trend of Republicans and Democrats teaming up to defeat progressive candidates. I give you a so-so on that one. But to defeat progressive candidates critical of U.S. support to Israel. Republican donors poured last-minute cash into former New York Representative Eliot Engel's re-election campaign in the face of Bowman's insurgent 2018 challenge. Pennsylvania billionaire Jeffrey Yass, a major GOP donor and funder of the Israeli think tank leading the rightward lurch in the country's judiciary, also funded a PAC run by Democrats and dedicated to challenging progressives in Democratic primaries. Is that so? I'm sort of going to look at the link here because they don't name the group. Funder of the Israeli think tank leading the rightward lurch in the country's Israel's judiciary. Although ours is having a rightward lurch too, but I don't think any Israeli think tank is leading our country's rightward lurch. But also funded a PAC run by Democrats and dedicated to challenging progressives. And I have questions about whether or not that PAC is dedicated to challenging progressives or not. Let's see. Maybe. No. Okay. It is called the Moderate PAC. I'm looking at their link, which is to another of Akela Lacey's articles at the Intercept. So, take that with a small grain of salt here. But centrist Democratic PAC's sole funder is a Republican mega donor. That doesn't sound too good. The Moderate PAC, created to go after progressive primary challengers, received all its money from one source, Republican mega donor Jeffrey Yass. Okay. Well, that doesn't sound so great. But good side reading for you there. All right. For the moment, we'll concede that point. We're reserving the right to take it up perhaps in the future. Lee told The Intercept that AIPAC used Republican money to fund ads meant to discourage black voters from coming out on Election Day. AIPAC funneled money from Republican billionaires to spend $5 million attacking me with baseless lies and racist tactics, Lee said. She said political ads accused her of having ties to far-right figures like former President Donald Trump in order to keep black voters from showing up to vote. Okay. By the way, who are we talking about here? I mean, again, identified as Lee, and I'm sure, I don't know, my mind goes to Barbara Lee, but I don't think that's who we're talking about here. But just scanning back, who else has been called out in the article before? But I don't know. I guess I'm gonna have to scroll too far back in order to make it effective. It would have been easier to deal with if I were reading the article to myself, but aloud, I get distracted about who's been introduced along the way and who has not. All right, but that too, a relatively highly charged attack there. Lee drew a contrast to AIPAC's support for scores of insurrectionist Republicans who supported election denial and shared the same goals as a mob of armed white supremacists and anti-Semites. Yikes. Now they're targeting black incumbent champions for poor, working-class black folks in districts where they've never been represented, she said. These attacks add fuel to the fire of fascism, tearing away the history, civil rights, and lives of black Americans who are the base of the Democratic Party. And as dramatic, perhaps, as that is, again, a good point lies at the center of it. Sometimes you might have to say, I understand what they're doing here, and I think it's well within their rights to do it, but looking at the overall picture here, is it wise to be disrupting the feeder chain of black representation at this particular moment in time when perhaps you should be jumping out of the way instead? On the other hand, where the winner of the Democratic primary in heavily Democratic districts is almost virtually guaranteed a victory in the general election, it pays to pay close attention to what happens in the primary. And, you know, the time is, times are tough when it comes to separating out the motives for questioning Israeli policy. Sometimes it is organic and deeply felt and well-founded. Other times, maybe not so much. And occasionally, the work of people running interference campaigns on behalf of, well, could be anybody, I suppose. And so you want to examine these things carefully. And there is, of course, there's always been a current in the black community, as there has been in every community, but sometimes it works its way to the fore more quickly in the black community, where this sort of thing, questioning of Israel, whether it's legitimate and on policy grounds, or whether it is in fact driven by, let's say, that particular strain of anti-Semitism driven by Louis Farrakhan and his supporters, for instance. That too could easily be regarded as questionably organic, but maybe also disruption propaganda. Certainly, it's the sort of thing that could have started organically and may find itself supported by, would make a great candidate for support, say, by Russian interference interests, who say, okay, this already exists. We had nothing to do with starting it. We may not even have had anything to do with fanning the flames or keeping it supported, but it would be a good idea to do that now. But it's very easy to get yourself nominated as the Democratic candidate for Congress in a overwhelmingly Democratic district without suffering from what would ordinarily set you back in terms of aligning yourself with some dangerously anti-Semitic ideas, or accepting support from people who might benefit you politically for other reasons, but who also carry tremendous anti-Semitic, anti-Israel baggage as well. And, you know, the best example here is Farrakhan types, whose alignment with you won't hurt you in a primary contest between black candidates in an overwhelmingly black district, and won't hurt you even in the general election. But once you arrive in Congress, sort of that third unspoken stage where you need to integrate yourself into Congress with people who are adamantly pro-Israel, even when Israel's way, way wrong, or just wary of Farrakhan, or will use that and hold that against you and be reluctant to work with you for that reason, in whatever capacity. All of this has to go into the calculation. It's just carefully excised from the story very often by The Intercept. So, okay, controversial statements on my part. Let's move on to some other major stories of the day. I have to alert you to the fact we probably haven't finished reading the last 3 installments of ProPublica's probe into what the hell is going on in Clarence Thomas's private life when another one comes out. And we just got to make you aware of that one heading into the weekend. No way we're going to get through this one either. But let's see. Last time we ran out of time talking about the 38 different luxury vacations that Thomas had taken on the dime, dollar, $1 million bill of not just Harlan Crow, but several other billionaires. And we didn't even get to the part where we were naming those billionaires, but you've probably read that story, just as you've probably started reading this one too. But we'll note it for the record, the newest installment, Clarence Thomas secretly participated in Koch Network donor events. Is that bad? Is that wrong? Should I not have done that? Yeah, for a bunch of people who are supposed to remember, attend the State of the Union in total stony-faced silence, for you to be at Koch Network political retreats coordinating on policy with them. That's a no. But it's a no that's only enforceable by impeachment, so it's a yes. Go ahead. Nothing we can do about it. Joshua Kaplan, Justin Elliott, Alex Majeski, once again teaming up for this, and I don't know, starting to look like Pulitzer Prize time for these guys. Congratulations. Here's the latest. On January 25th, 2018, dozens of private jets descended on Palm Springs International Airport, probably January 26th as well. You know what? Every day of the year, dozens of private jets descend on Palm Springs International Airport, but this time, some of the richest people in the country were arriving for the annual Winter Donor Summit of the Koch Network, the political organization founded by libertarian, quote-unquote libertarian, it's gimmitarian, billionaires Charles and David Koch. A long weekend of strategizing, relaxation in the California sun, and high-dollar fundraising lay ahead. Just after 6 p.m., a Gulfstream G200 jet touched down on the tarmac. One of the Koch Network's most powerful allies was on board. Was it Charles Koch? No. David Koch? No. It was Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Not supposed to be happening. During the summit, the justice went to a private dinner for the network's donors. Thomas has attended Koch donor events at least twice over the years, according to interviews with 3 former network employees and 1 major donor. The justice was brought in to speak, staffers said, in the hopes that such access would encourage donors to continue giving. He probably wanted people to believe he was at a, what's the name of that stupid society that he has joined? The Rags to Riches Society. Anyway, I can't remember, even though it's a very famous person's name and I'm blanking out. And so, I'm on the air. What can I do? You know who I'm talking about. That puts Thomas in the extraordinary position of having served as a fundraising draw for a network that has brought cases before the Supreme Court. Whoops. Including one of the most closely watched of the upcoming term. Thomas never reported the 2018 flight to Palm Springs in his annual financial disclosure form, an apparent violation of federal law requiring justices to report most gifts. A Koch Network spokesman said the network did not pay for the private jet. Since Thomas didn't disclose it, it's not clear who did pay. I mean, if the Kochs pay for it, but they don't pay for it from Koch Network money, would they say, we didn't use the Koch Network to pay for it, just a regular Koch person paid for it? Anyway, Thomas's involvement in the events is part of a years-long personal relationship with the Koch brothers that has remained almost entirely out of public view. It developed over years of trips to the Bohemian Grove, a secretive all-men's retreat in Northern California. Thomas has been a regular at the Grove for 2 decades, where he stayed in a small camp with real estate billionaire Harlan Crow and billionaires the Kochs, according to records and people who've spent time with him there. The story, by the way, in case we don't get to it, is illustrated with a photo of Thomas at Bohemian Grove with David Koch and Ken Burns, the documentarian filmmaker, whose films, by the way, Koch has financially supported, sitting in the middle. And I did see, was it Southpaw NYC saying on Blue Sky, what a heel turn that is. Ken Burns in the middle of those two. Kind of a disappointment. I wonder if it'll affect reactions to his next couple of films, which would be too bad because they're pretty good. But I mean, I guess we all knew Koch brothers were paying for it. You see that in the announcement on PBS before they play them. Anyway, Thomas's involvement, a years-long situation. A spokesman for the Koch Network, formerly known as Stand Together, did not answer detailed questions about his role at the Palm Springs event, but said Thomas wasn't present for fundraising conversations, except he was brought in as a fundraising draw. The idea that attending a couple of events to promote a book or giving dinner remarks, as all the justices do, could somehow be undue influence just doesn't hold water, the spokesperson said in a statement. Except it does, and a lot of it. All of the sitting justices and many who came before them have contributed to the national dialogue in speeches, book tours, and social gatherings, the statement added. Our events are no different. To claim otherwise is false, except most people don't arrive on private jets, given them for free, and attend for years at a time over decades. Not years at a time, but what I mean is several years in a row, over decades, long history, always camping out with the same billionaires, and yada yada. In a series of stories this year, as you know, ProPublica reported that Thomas has accepted undisclosed luxury travel from Crow and a coterie of other ultra-wealthy men. Crow also purchased Thomas's mother's home, paid for private school tuition for the child Thomas was raising as his son. Thomas has said little in response. In a statement earlier this year, he said that Crow was a close friend whom he has joined on, quote, family trips to Bohemian Grove, with none of his family. He also argued that he was not required to disclose the free vacations. Thomas did not respond to questions for this story. The Code of Conduct, of course, for the federal judiciary lays out rules designed to preserve judges' impartiality and independence, which it calls indispensable to justice in our society. The code specifically prohibits both political activity and participation in fundraising. Judges are advised, for instance, not to associate themselves with any group publicly identified with controversial legal, social, or political positions. Because that's what the Koch Network is all about. But the Code of Conduct only applies to the lower courts. At the Supreme Court, justices decide for themselves what's appropriate. I can't imagine. It takes my breath away, frankly, that he would go to a Koch Network event for donors, said John E. Jones III, a retired federal judge appointed by President George W. Bush. Jones said that if he had gone to a Koch summit as a district court judge, I'd have gotten a letter that would have commenced a disciplinary proceeding. What you're seeing is a slow creep toward unethical behavior. Do it if you can get away with it, Jones said. The Koch Network is among the largest and most influential political organizations of the last half century, and it's underwritten a far-reaching campaign to influence the course of American law. In the case of the Supreme Court, in a case the Supreme Court will hear this coming term, the justices could give the network an historic victory, limiting federal agencies' power to issue regulations in areas ranging from the environment to labor rights to consumer protection. After shepherding the case to court, Koch Network staff attorneys are now asking the justices to overturn a decades-old precedent. Thomas used to support the precedent, but has flipped his position in recent years. Just needed to tell you all of this. 2 years ago, one of the network's groups was the plaintiff in another Supreme Court case, which was about nonprofits' ability to keep their donors secret. That's key to the way they operate, right? In that case, Thomas sided with the 6-3 conservative majority in the Koch group's favor. Not that remarkable. Pretty predictable. Charles Koch did not respond to a detailed questions for the story. David Koch also didn't respond, but that's on account of his having died in 2019. The Koch Network is an overlapping set of nonprofits, perhaps best known for its work in helping cultivate the Tea Party movement in the Obama years. Recently rebranded as Stand Together, the network includes the powerful Americans for Prosperity Action, which spent over $65 million supporting Republican candidates in the last election cycle. Just as a reminder of who they are and what they do. You know the names, but you may not remember the groups that they ran, especially as they keep switching the names in an effort to duck accountability. Though Charles Koch is one of the 25 richest people in the world, worth an estimated $64 billion, he raises money from other wealthy people to amplify the network's reach. The network brought in at least $700 million in 2021, the most recent year for which data is available. It has more than 1,000 employees who, on paper, work for different groups. But for all its complexity, the network is a centralized operation, staffers said. Many of the groups occupy the same building in Arlington, Virginia, and share leadership and often staff. Don't do anything to the building. It's illegal. Many of the donations go into a central pot from which hundreds of millions of dollars are dispersed to the smaller groups focused on various political and social concerns, according to the tax filings of former employees. I say don't do anything to the building because, like, for a moment there when I was like, oh, they occupy the same building in Arlington, and I just, like, imagined the closing scenes of Fight Club for a second there. But it's not a good idea, as it was made clear, I think, in the movie as well. But anyway, for decades, the Kochs have held a deep antipathy to government regulation. They pretend to be libertarians, remember. When Charles Koch's brother David ran for vice president on the Libertarian Party ticket in 1980, the party platform called for abolishing the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and the Food and Drug Administration. Every winter, the network holds its marquee fundraising event in the Coachella Valley. Coachella, how do you like that? In Southern California. This demystifies the weirdness of all of the tech bros, I think, going to Burning Man, right? They all go to Coachella, but not that Coachella. Hundreds of donors fly in to learn how their money is being spent and plan for the coming year. Former staffers describe an emphasis on preventing leaks that bordered on obsession. The network often rents out an entire hotel for the event, keeping out eavesdroppers. Documents left behind are methodically shredded, unlike what gets left in the bathrooms of Congress by Matt Gaetz. One recent attendee called Koch security staff in a golf cart escorting their Uber driver out of the hotel to make sure he left. The former staffers spoke, of course, on condition of anonymity because they feared retaliation, and rightly so. All right. There is much more, of course, to this article, and once again, we cut short our rating of the ProPublica work, even though it deserves all of our attention. But I believe you've gotten conditioned to reading these things on your own over the weekend because you just can't wait to get to the rest of the details. What have we left out today that... Of course, I had it all set up, too, and I stayed up late editing Rosalind McGregor's piece and then teased it to you. All right, well, I'll update you in the coming week about what's going on in Ottawa County. More shenanigans, but the shenanigans will continue. They'll hold them until we get updated. I think we can probably arrange that with them. They enjoy the attention. I'm sorry, Rosalind, meant to get to that today and got caught up in so many other things, particularly that Intercept article, which I think deserved some parsing, to say the least. Okay, well, let's see, much more. Oh, I wanted to at least update you on the fact that the Senate went ahead, by the way, just the other day, noted in The Hill, and confirmed a new Army Chief of Staff despite Tommy Tuberville's holds. They can't get to all of the things. We talked about how much time it would take to get through all of the holds. But can they spend a week getting through one to get top brass in place so that we avoid serious consequences down the road? Yes, they did. They went ahead and did it, in case you were wondering when they were just going to pull the ripcord on that one. They've just done it.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time now to listen to Justice Putnam on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Reminder to you, by the way, we won't be back on Monday morning, at least not live. See you then on Tuesday. And I got a reminder to myself to tell Joan that we will be on the air then. Stay tuned now, though, for that collection of esoteric stories from around the country and around the world for a Friday next.